The polished chrome grille of the 26-foot moving truck gleamed with what Carol Ann Peterson could only describe as belligerent insolence. It was parked sprawled across the pristine asphalt of Primrose Lane, its sheer, unapologetic bulk an affront to the carefully curated tranquility of Willow Creek Estates. Its diesel engine rumbled with a low guttural growl, a sound as alien to this manicured sanctuary as a pterodactyl's screech. For Carol, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association and chairperson of the Architectural Control Committee, this was not merely a truck, it was an invasion. She stood directly in its path, a lone figure of righteous order against a titan of chaos. In one hand, she held a laminated, tab-indexed copy of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS in the other. She clutched a bright yellow Stanley Powerlock tape measure, its hook dangling ominously. She was not a tall woman, but years of unwavering certainty had gifted her a posture that added inches to her stature. Her silver blonde hair was sculpted into a helmet of aerodynamic perfection, impervious to the gentle August breeze. Her polo shirt, the color of a pale lemon, was tucked crisply into her beige chinos. She was the very picture of suburban authority. The driver's side door of the truck hissed open, and a young man swung down onto the pavement. He was tall, clad in a faded t-shirt for some tech startup Carol had never heard of, and his face wore an expression of weary confusion. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" he asked, his voice friendly, laced with the exhaustion of someone who had been packing and driving for the better part of 2 days. "You're, standing in front of my truck?" Carol did not move. She allowed a slow, deliberate silence to hang in the air, a tool she had perfected in countless board meetings. It made people uncomfortable. It made them reconsider their positions. "You are in violation," she stated, her voice calm and clear, carrying the weight of undisputed law. The young man, Alex, blinked. "Violation. I'm just moving in. This is 24 Primrose Lane, right?" "That is correct," Carol affirmed, taking a single, authoritative step forward. "And in doing so, you are in violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4. Subsection B. Vehicles exceeding 2 axles or a gross vehicle weight of 10,000 pounds are prohibited from parking on community thoroughfares for any period exceeding 60 minutes for active loading or unloading purposes." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the laminated page. "Your vehicle has been stationary for precisely 1 hour and 14 minutes. I have been timing you." Alex stared at her, then at the clipboard, then back at her. A small incredulous laugh escaped his lips. "You're kidding, right? We're in the middle of unloading a house full of stuff. It takes time." "The rules," Carol said, her gaze as unyielding as granite, "are not suggestions. Mr. Riley, Alex Riley, and with all due respect, the rule is absurd. How is anyone supposed to move into a house in under an hour?" "Planning," Carol said simply. "Efficiency. Most new residents coordinate with the management company to schedule a designated arrival window and utilize smaller, more compliant vehicles for shuttling items from a larger truck parked off-site. It is all detailed in the new resident welcome packet, which is sent digitally upon the closing of escrow. I trust you received it." Alex's face was a canvas of growing frustration. "I've been a little busy, selling a house and buying a new one and packing my entire life into boxes. I skimmed it. It looked like a lot of stuff about lawn, height, and what color you can paint your mailbox." "The color of one's mailbox is a reflection of the community's collective soul," Carol intoned, her voice taking on a sermon-like quality. "It is the small details, Mr. Riley, that separate civilization from anarchy. Your truck is a harbinger of anarchy." From the back of the truck, one of the movers, a brawny man with sweat-soaked hair, yelled out, "Hey Alex, we're on the clock here, boss. This lady want an autograph or something?" The comment hung in the air, a greasy smear on the otherwise pristine atmosphere. Carol's spine stiffened. The movers, with their grimy clothes and casual disrespect, were extensions of the truck's blight. "Your hired help is costing you money, Mr. Riley," Carol said, a hint of triumphant pity in her tone. "And every minute this vehicle remains, it risks incurring a preliminary fine of $100, with an additional $50 for every subsequent 15-minute interval. As per the fining schedule, Appendix C." Alex ran a hand through his hair, his patience visibly fraying. "Look, let's be reasonable. I have a sofa, a king-sized bed, and about 50 more boxers in there. What do you want me to do? Tell the movers to go home and bring everything back in a Prius?" "That would be a compliant, if inefficient, solution," Carol conceded. "This is insane. I'm calling the police." "Please do," Carol said, a thin smile gracing her lips. "They will inform you, as they have informed others before you, that this is a private community and a civil matter governed by the legally binding contract you signed when you purchased your property. The CC and RS, Mr. Riley. They are your new Bible." Alex pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. Carol waited, a statue of smug tranquility. She knew how this played out. The bewilderment, the anger, the dawning horror, and finally, the reluctant compliance. It was a dance she knew well, and she always led while he was occupied. Her gaze drifted from the monstrous truck to the property itself. Her eyes, trained by years of searching for infractions, scanned the yard. And then she saw it. It was a small thing, almost hidden behind a manicured Japanese maple. A section of temporary, green plastic mesh fencing, barely 3 feet high, had been hastily erected, forming a small corral near the side of the house. Inside it, a golden retriever puppy chewed happily on a blue rubber bone. Carol's breath caught in her chest. It was a violation so flagrant, so brazen, it was almost beautiful in its audacity. Alex hung up the phone, his face grim. They said they can't get involved unless there's a criminal threat, and there isn't, Carol said smoothly, her mind already racing ahead to her next move. Merely a regulatory enforcement action. However, Mr. Riley, the truck, has become a secondary concern. She pointed a rigid finger toward the mesh fence. That, she declared, her voice dropping to a low dramatic register, is a non-permitted temporary structure. By Law 9, Section 2, all fencing, permanent or temporary, must be submitted for review and approved in writing by the Architectural Control Committee prior to installation. Furthermore, by Law 11, Section 1, pets must be leashed at all times when not within a fully enclosed, permanent and committee-approved fenced area. Alex looked at the small fence, then at his puppy, who had paused its chewing to look up with wide, innocent eyes. That's for Buster. He's 10 weeks old. I put it up an hour ago so he wouldn't run into the street while we were unloading. Your puppy, Buster, is residing in an illegal enclosure on your property, which is itself currently in violation due to an oversized commercial vehicle. The violations are compounding, Mr. Riley. It is a cascade of not. Carol felt a thrill shoot through her. This was better than a simple parking infraction. This had layers. It had complexity. I am now obligated, she continued, her voice resonating with newfound purpose, to perform an immediate new resident site inspection to document these issues and ensure there are no other discrepancies. A what? Alex sputtered. You're not inspecting anything. It's my duty as president of the association, she said, taking a step toward his driveway. I need to access the rear and side yards to fully assess the situation. Absolutely not, Alex said, planting himself between her and the walkway to his side gate. You are not setting foot on my property without a warrant. A warrant? Carol let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, you poor, misguided man. You waived that right. CC and R, Article 5, Section 3, the association, through its authorized agents, shall have the right of entry onto any lot to perform inspections or to undertake corrective action for any violation of these covenants, provided that reasonable notice is given. Your multiple flagrant and ongoing violations constitute an exigent circumstance, negating the standard notice period. Now, please unlock your gate. Her heart was pounding now, a mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated righteousness. She was a detective on the verge of cracking a major case. What else was he hiding back there? An unapproved tool shed, a rogue vegetable garden, perhaps even a hot tub installed without the proper drainage surveys and noise abatement permits. The possibilities were dizzying. You're out of your mind, Alex said, his voice low and dangerous. Get off my property line, now. The standoff had attracted an audience. Mrs. Gable from across the street was peering through her blinds. Old Mr. Henderson, who was usually watering his petunias at this time, stood frozen, hose in hand, the water pooling around his orthopedic shoes. Even Beatrice Miller, a cynical divorcee who viewed the HOA with the same disdain she reserved for her ex-husband's new wife, was watching from her porch, a wry smirk on her face. Carol felt the weight of their gazes. She could not back down. To retreat now would be to show weakness. It would signal that the sacred CC and Rs were negotiable, and that was a world she could not, and would not, live in. The violation notice in Carol Ann Peterson's hand felt as flimsy and pathetic as a losing lottery ticket. She backed away from the revealing glow of Alex Riley's window, melting into the deep shadows of the Hendersons' overgrown oak tree. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The image was seared into her mind. The map, the sharp-suited professionals on the screen, the confident sweep of Alex's hand as he designated and dissected her world. This wasn't a skirmish over a puppy fence. This was reconnaissance. She scurried back across the street, her sensible walking shoes making no sound on the asphalt. The satisfying righteous anger that had propelled her all evening had evaporated, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar dread. She slipped into her house, locking the deadbolt with a decisive thud. But her home, her immaculate sanctuary of order, no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a fishbowl. She drew the blinds, plunging the room into darkness, but she could still feel his eyes on her, could still see that map glowing in her memory. Who was he? The question gnawed at her. Foregoing her usual evening routine of wiping down the kitchen counters and alphabetizing her spice rack, she went straight to her office. The 5-page violation notice lay on her desk, a monument to a battle she had already lost before it had even begun. She swept it into a drawer, out of sight. Then, she opened her web browser and typed Alex Riley into the search bar. The first few results were generic. Social media profiles, a photo from a college fun run. But then she saw it. a link to a corporate website with a sleek, minimalist logo, Nexus Urban Dynamics. She clicked. The website was a cascade of cool grays and electric blues, featuring stunning architectural renderings of futuristic cityscapes. The About Us page was a gallery of confident, smiling professionals. And there he was, Alex Riley, not a tech bro, not a simple homeowner. His title was Principal, Strategic Development, and Zoning. His biography was a paragraph of chilling corporate jargon that hit her like a physical blow. Alex specializes in identifying and revitalizing underutilized suburban assets, transforming legacy single-family zoning into vibrant higher-density, mixed-use communities. With a background in both municipal law and urban planning, he excels at navigating complex regulatory frameworks to unlock the hidden potential of stagnant property portfolios. His work focuses on sustainable growth, community integration, and maximizing investor returns. Carol read it once, then a second time. Underutilized suburban assets, legacy single-family zoning, stagnant property portfolios. He was talking about Willow Creek. He was talking about her home. The words were a different language for the same horrifying concept, destruction. He didn't see manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. He saw an asset to be revitalized, a portfolio to be maximized. He saw her life's work, the perfect order she had fought to maintain, as a problem to be solved with bulldozers and apartment blocks. The fight wasn't about a truck. It wasn't about a lawn. It was about the fundamental existence of Willow Creek Estates. He wasn't moving in, he was infiltrating. The dread curdled into a new, more potent emotion, a cold, hard fury. This was an invasion, and she was the last line of defense. Sleep offered no respite. She dreamt of towering glass condos casting long dark shadows over her sun-starved rosebushes, of the quiet cul-de-sac, choked with the traffic of 1,000 new residents who didn't know the rules for trash can placement. She awoke before dawn, her mission clear. She could not face this new enemy alone. She needed her army. She called an emergency meeting of the HOA board for that evening. The email subject line was stark, urgent, and confidential. Existential threat to community integrity. That evening, they gathered in Carol's living room, which she'd converted into a makeshift boardroom. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and rising panic. Gerald Finch, the treasurer, sat perched on the edge of an armchair, his knuckles white as he clutched a leather-bound folio. A retired accountant, Gerald saw the world as a balance sheet. Every decision was weighed in assets and liabilities, and he was pathologically averse to red ink. Barbara Barb Jenkins, the board secretary, was already sipping the iced tea Carol had provided, her eyes wide with a ravenous hunger for gossip. Barb's primary function on the board was to serve as the neighborhood's information hub. Her minutes were often more dramatic than accurate, but her loyalty to Carol was absolute. Then there was Stephen Liu, the vice president, a young, ambitious associate at a downtown law firm. Stephen had joined the board to gain community leadership experience for his partnership track. He was pragmatic, sharp, and understood the legal razor's edge upon which HOAs operated. He often served as the reluctant brake to Carol's acceleration, and she resented him for it. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Carol began, her voice a low graveled instrument of command. She stood before her fireplace, the empty hearth framing her like a stage. "Last night, our community was targeted." She laid out the events of the previous day, painting a vivid picture of Alex Riley's belligerence, the monstrous truck, the brazen puppy fence, and the obscene spectacle of his furniture-strewn lawn. Barb gasped at the appropriate moments. Gerald fidgeted, his discomfort growing with every mention of a new violation. "But this is not about a simple rule breaker," Carol continued, her voice dropping. She turned to her laptop and projected the Nexus Urban Dynamics website onto the large television mounted over her fireplace. She clicked directly to Alex's profile. "This is who Mr. Riley is." She let them read the biography in silence. The effect was immediate. Barb's gossipy excitement soured into alarm. Gerald's face went pale, as if he'd just seen a catastrophic accounting error. Only Stephen Liu leaned forward, his expression unreadable, studying the screen with a lawyer's detached analysis. "He's a developer," Barb whispered, the words laced with horror. "Worse," Carol corrected. "He's a professional HOA killer. He sees our homes, our lives, as a stagnant property portfolio. He wants to tear down Willow Creek and build that." She gestured to the website's renderings of dense urban villages. "We cannot let this happen," she declared. "I have already drafted a comprehensive list of his current violations. One propose we levy the maximum possible fines, effective immediately. $100 per day for the lawn debris, $50 per day for the unapproved fencing. We will bury him in fines until he either complies or sells his lot and leaves." Gerald cleared his throat, a nervous, fluttering sound. "Carol, the fines are one thing, but this man, his profession, he's a litigator, or at least he works with them. To go after him so aggressively it seems financially imprudent. A lawsuit could drain our reserve funds." "A lawsuit," Carol scoffed. "On what grounds? He is the one in violation. The CC and R are on our side. Gerald. They are an ironclad contract. They're a contract that can be challenged. Stephen Liu interjected, his voice calm and steady. And frankly, Carol, your actions yesterday may have given him grounds. Carol turned her gaze on him. My actions were in defense of this community. Your actions, Stephen countered, meeting her stare, included by your own account? Physically obstructing his vehicle and demanding access to his property without the contractually stipulated 24-hour written notice, an exigent circumstance, is a high legal bar to clear. It usually means a fire or a flood, not a puppy fence. He could argue harassment or illegal detainment, naming him president of the HOA and then blocking his path. It's not a good look. We need to be careful. We need to proceed by the book. He spit on the book. Carol shot back, her voice rising. He threw the book on his lawn along with his hideous sectional sofa. This is not the time for timidity. This is a time for strength. It's a time for strategy, Stephen said coolly. Not a temper tantrum. We authorize the fines for the clear, photographable violations, the lawn and the fence. We send the notice via certified mail, through our attorney. We create a perfect paper trail. We do not engage him in person. We do not give him more ammunition. The room was tense. Gerald looked back and forth between Carol and Stephen, a spectator at a tennis match he desperately wanted to end. Barb, sensing the shift in power, simply nodded in agreement with whoever was speaking most forcefully. Carol felt her authority being challenged in her own living room, but she knew, deep down, that Stephen was right about the lawyer. She needed the board's unified support. She had to make a concession. Fine, she said, the word tasting like ash. We will do it your way, Stephen, for now. Engage, Mr. Abernathy. I want a letter drafted tomorrow morning. Maximum fines. Formal language. Demand immediate and total compliance. But make no mistake, she added, her eyes sweeping across the room and landing back on Stephen. If he pushes, we will push back with everything we have. This is a war for the soul of Willow Creek. The decision was made. The HOA was on a war footing, but as the board members left, Carol felt a bitter residue of resentment. She had won the vote, but Stephen's caution felt like a criticism, a crack in the foundation of her command. The next few days were a torment of waiting. The mountain of furniture on Alex Riley's lawn became a local landmark. Neighbors would slow their cars as they drove by, some shaking their heads in disgust, others with a flicker of amusement. Beatrice Miller, the cynical divorcee from next door, caught Carol by the world narrowed to the piece of heavy cream paper in Carol's hand and the calm, knowing nod from the man across the street. The shrill ringing of her phone was a distant annoyance, an insect buzzing at the edge of her consciousness. Gerald Finch's panic was irrelevant. The $50,000 insurance deductible was irrelevant. The personal lawsuit, while insulting, was also, in a strange way, irrelevant. They were merely tactical skirmishes. The rezoning application was the war. A strange calm descended over Carol. The fear from the night before, that cold, slithering dread, had been burned away by the white-hot intensity of the threat. It was a clarifying fire. Her purpose, which had been the mundane enforcement of aesthetic covenants, had been elevated. She was no longer a president. She was a protector. She was no longer defending the height of lawns. She was defending the very bedrock of her existence. Finally answered the phone, cutting off Gerald's hysterical squawking mid-flow. Gerald, stop, she commanded, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edges, replaced by something harder, colder. Hyperventilating will not help us. Carol, did you read it? They're suing you. They're suing us. Our D&O insurance, the deductible is $50,000, and his lawyers, Donahue, Finch, and Calloway, they don't lose. Carol, they represent billionaires who want to build stadiums. We are not going to be talking about the lawsuit, Gerald, Carol stated. It's a faint distraction designed to make us panic and waste our resources. We are going to focus on the real threat, the application for but the money, the liability. The money is meaningless if in 5 years our single-family homes are replaced by a 6-story condominium complex and a bistro selling overpriced avocado toast, she snapped. Get a hold of yourself. I'm calling another board meeting. My house tomorrow night. Be there. She hung up before he could object. She spent the next 24 hours in a fugue of research and preparation. She read the city's entire zoning code. She looked up every member of the City Planning Commission, studying their voting records. She researched Donahue, Finch, and Calloway, reading about their past victories. The way they would tie up small municipalities in years of litigation until they bled them dry and got what they wanted. The more she read, the more her resolve hardened. This was David versus Goliath, and she would be David. The next evening, the board gathered again in her living room. The atmosphere was funereal. Gerald looked as though he hadn't slept, his eyes puffy and red. Barb, stripped of her usual gossipy cheer, wrung her hands in her lap. Stephen Liu stood by the window, his arms crossed, his expression grim. Hey, was the only one who seemed to grasp the full scope of their predicament. This is no longer an HOA matter. Carol began dispensing with any preamble. She paced before them, a general addressing her field commanders. The fines are meaningless. The lawn furniture is a symbol. This is now a political battle for the future of our neighborhood. She laid out the rezoning process as she understood it: public hearings, planning commission recommendations, a final vote by the city council. He thinks we are a sleepy little suburb that will roll over. He thinks he can dazzle the city with his slick presentations and talk of progress. We have to show them that we are a community of voters. We have to make this politically toxic for anyone who supports it. And how do we do that? Gerald whispered, his voice trembling. They have armies of lawyers. We have Mr. Abernathy, who I think still uses a fax machine. We will fight them in the court of public opinion, Carol declared. We will mobilize every single resident in Willow Creek. We will start a Willow Creek Defense Fund to hire our own experts, a land use consultant, maybe even a PR firm. We will pack every public hearing. We will write letters. We will make so much noise that the city council will be terrified of voting against us. Stephen Liu finally spoke, his voice cutting through Carol's passionate rhetoric. She's right. The lawsuit is a sideshow. The rezoning battle is the main event, and it's a battle we can win. Everyone turned to him, but it will be expensive and ugly, he warned. Nexus Urban Dynamics will have traffic engineers, environmental impact specialists, and economic analysts testifying on their behalf. They will argue that this project will increase the city's tax base and provide needed housing. They will paint us as wealthy, selfish NIMBEs, Barb asked. Not in my backyard, Stephen explained. It's what they call residents who oppose new development. It's a powerful political weapon. Then we need to create our own weapons, Carol said, her eyes alight with a fervent gleam. We need to control the narrative. We are not TMBs. We are protectors of a community. We are guardians of the suburban dream. She laid out her plan, a letter to every household, an all-hands community meeting at the clubhouse, and a full fundraising and propaganda campaign. For the first time, Stephen Liu looked at her with something approaching respect. He might not like her methods, but he couldn't fault her strategy. I'll help you draft the letter, he said. We need to be careful with the wording, fact-based, but firm. We outline the threat to property values and quality of life. The board, caught between their terror of Alex Riley and their fear of Carol's new, intense persona, reluctantly agreed. They were no longer a board that debated the color of mailboxes. They were a war council. The letter Carol drafted, with Stephen's legalistic edits, was a masterpiece of controlled alarmism. It was printed on tasteful ivory paper, with the Willow Creek Estates logo at the top. Dear neighbor, it began. Your home and our community are facing an unprecedented threat. It went on to describe, in harrowing detail, the proposal by an outside corporate developer to fundamentally alter the character of their neighborhood. It spoke of protecting our hard-earned home equity, of the potential for overwhelmed schools and infrastructure, and the specter of choked streets and rising crime rates that often accompanied high-density development. It carefully omitted any mention of Carol's initial confrontation with Alex, framing him as a hostile, predatory invader from the very beginning. The letter concluded with an invitation to an emergency community meeting and a plea for contributions. To the newly formed Willow Creek Defense Fund, Carol didn't just mail them, she and a terrified but loyal Barb hand-delivered them, a personal touch to amplify the urgency. The reactions were varied. Some residents were immediately incensed, pledging their support and writing checks on the spot. Others were more skeptical, their faces clouded with concern. Beatrice Miller accepted the letter with a cynical arch of her eyebrow. Selling war bonds now, are we, Carol? She drawled. You know, for a man who wants to destroy the neighborhood, he's awfully quiet. I saw him helping Mr. Henderson carry his groceries in yesterday. Carol ignored the comment. We expect to see you at the meeting, Beatrice. This affects all of us. The night of the community meeting, the clubhouse was packed, the air hummed with anxiety. Carol stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of worried faces. This was her moment. All her years of commanding board meetings, of enforcing rules with an iron will, had been training for this. My friends, my neighbors, she began, her voice resonating with emotion. I look out at you tonight, and I see more than just residents. I see a family that has been targeted by a predator. She launched into her speech, a powerful populist tirade that cast them as the heroic defenders of the American dream. She was no longer the petty tyrant of Primrose Lane. She was a charismatic leader, a suburban Boudica rallying her tribe. She painted a grim picture of their future if the rezoning were to pass, a future of noise, traffic, and plummeting property values. A world where their children were no longer safe to play in the streets. The crowd was rapt, their fear being expertly channeled into collective anger. Shed them. Stephen Liu spoke next, providing a sober, factual overview of the legal fight ahead. He was the calm voice of strategy to her passionate call to arms, and the combination was effective. When they opened the floor for questions, the first few were susceptible, residents asking how they could help. Then, a man in the third row stood up. I have a question for Ms. Peterson, he said. I've heard rumors that this all started because of an argument you had with Mr. Riley when he was moving in. Is it true that the HOA is now being sued because of your actions? The air went still. Carol felt a flush of anger. This is not about one person or one argument, she deflected smoothly. This is about a calculated plan by a corporate developer to exploit our community for profit. To suggest otherwise is to play into their hands. Her answer seemed to satisfy most of the room. She was about to move on, feeling she had successfully navigated the challenge, when a voice cut through the murmur from the back of the room. Perhaps I could clarify. Every head turned. Standing near the doorway.com and composed in a simple dark sweater and jeans was Alex Riley. A wave of gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. He walked calmly down the center aisle. I apologize for the intrusion, he said, his voice polite and reasonable. But as a homeowner in Willow Creek, I believe I have a right to be here. And since my character and my intentions are the topic of discussion, I thought it only fair that you hear from me directly. He reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd, standing a few feet. Saturday dawned bright and nauseatingly cheerful. Carol Ann Peterson had been awake since 4:30 a.m., watching the nascent light creep over the rooftops of her domain. From her bedroom window, she had a perfect, unimpeded view of 24 Primrose Lane, and the scene unfolding there felt like a personal violation. Alex Riley was setting up for his coffee clutch. He moved with an easy, unhurried grace, arranging a folding table with a crisp white tablecloth. He positioned a large, gleaming stainless steel coffee urn and 2 pink boxers from Le Rave, the absurdly expensive French bakery downtown. The centerpiece, of course, was the easel, holding that seductive, poisonous architectural rendering of the new Willow Creek. It was all so casual, so welcoming, so utterly diabolical. He wasn't just building a case. He was building a constituency. Carol felt a surge of impotent fury. The tool she had spent a decade mastering, the meticulously referenced bylaws, the power of a well-timed violation notice, the sheer force of her own intimidating presence were as useless against this as a fly swatter against a fog. He was fighting with charisma and croissants. How was she supposed to issue a fine for excessive charm? She couldn't stop them from going. The letter she had circulated, meant to galvanize her troops, now seemed like a shriek of hysteria compared to his calm, open invitation. But she could not allow the event to go unchallenged. She would not hide behind her blinds. She had to bear witness, to see which of her neighbors were so icily swayed, to identify the weak links in her chain of defense. She put on her most severe navy blue blazer, a piece of clothing she thought of as her battle armor, and prepared for observation. At precisely 10 a.m. the siege began. The first to arrive was, predictably, Mr. Henderson. He shuffled across his lawn, drawn in by the memory of Alex helping him with his groceries. Alex greeted him with a warm handshake and poured him a coffee, listening intently as the old man gestured toward his oversized yard and talked about the difficulty of maintenance. Then came the Gables from across the street, a younger couple with 2 small children. Alex immediately crouched down to the children's level, producing 2 chocolate-filled croissants from one of the pink boxers. The parents beamed. Carol watched, her stomach churning, as Alex pointed to a green space on the rendering and spoke about a new, modern playground. The ultimate betrayal came in the form of Barbara "Barb" Jenkins. Her own board secretary Barb scurried across the street, her expression a pathetic mix of guilt and greedy anticipation. Just doing a little reconnaissance. Carol. She had chirped over the phone earlier, a transparently false excuse. Carol watched as Barb accepted a flaky almond pastry, her head bobbing enthusiastically as Alex spoke. She wasn't doing reconnaissance. She was defecting for baked goods. And then there was Beatrice Miller, who strolled over with the relaxed air of a spectator at the Coliseum. She accepted a black coffee and stood next to the easel, her lips curved in a permanent, ironic smirk. She caught Carol's eye from across the street and raised her cup in a mocking toast. Alex was a master. He never pushed, never sold, he listened. He empathized. He remembered that Mrs. Gable had admired his hydrangeas and talked about soil acidity. He asked about the Hendersons' grandchildren. He presented his project not as a real estate deal, but as a collaborative solution to problems his neighbors didn't even know they had. He used words like input, vision, and partnership. He was weaving a spell, and Primrose Lane was falling under it. Carol couldn't stand it any longer. Watching from her window felt like cowardice. She smoothed her blazer, took a deep breath, and marched across the street with the grim determination of a soldier advancing on an enemy machine gun nest. As she approached the small gathering on the lawn, a hush fell. The cheerful chatter ceased. All eyes turned to her. Alex looked up from his conversation with the Gables, and a warm, welcoming smile spread across his face. It was his most infuriatingly effective weapon. Carol, I'm so glad you decided to join us, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We were just discussing the potential for a community garden. Can I get you a coffee? Or maybe a bear claw? I think there's one left. His manufactured bonhomie was a tactical masterstroke. It instantly framed her as the outsider, the party crasher. Her severe expression and rigid posture stood in stark contrast to the relaxed, neighborly scene. I am not here for pastries, Mr. Riley, she said, her voice tight and cold. I am here to inform you that this entire display is in violation of the community covenants, specifically by Law 8, Section 6, regarding unapproved signage, and by 12, governing events that could be construed as commercial or political solicitation. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Alex simply maintained his patient smile. You're absolutely right to be concerned with the rules, Carol, he said smoothly, turning her attack into an affirmation. And I appreciate you keeping us all on the straight and narrow. That's why this isn't a political event. It's just a conversation between neighbors. And this rendering isn't a sign. It's just a piece of art I wanted to share. A concept. A conversation starter. In fact, he added, turning to the small crowd, the very points Carol is bringing up are why I wanted to have this chat. To make sure that whatever plan we develop together, it follows every rule and has the full support of the community. He had absorbed her salvo and fired it back at her. Painting himself as the collaborative one and her as the rigid obstructionist, she tried another angle. This conversation starter is a fantasy, she said, gesturing dismissively at the rendering. Have you conducted a traffic impact study for this? A geological survey? An environmental impact report? Do you have any idea how your plan would affect the water table? Those are all excellent, crucial questions, Alex replied, nodding seriously. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, friendly tone. And they're exactly the questions we'll need to answer as we move forward. I would never dream of proposing a formal plan without exhaustive studies, but I can't commission those studies until I have a sense of what the community actually wants. For instance, he said, turning to Mr. Henderson, Mr. Henderson was just telling me how much he worries about keeping up with his yard work. He loves Willow Creek, but he's afraid he might have to move in a few years. That's why we're exploring the townhome option to allow our most valued, long-term residents to age in place, right here in the community they helped build. Mr. Henderson beamed, nodding in vigorous agreement. That's right, he gets it. Carol looked at the old man's trusting face and felt a profound sense of defeat. She was losing them. The very people she had sworn to protect were being charmed away from her, one by one. Her every attack was parried, her every rule was turned into a reason for more conversation. She was a warrior armed with a rulebook on a battlefield of emotion and ideas. She had no response. To continue arguing would only make her look more shrill, more unreasonable. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned her back on the scene, on the smiling faces, the half-eaten pastries, and the triumphant gaze of Alex Riley, and retreated. The walk back to her own front door felt like a mile. She could feel their eyes on her back, their sympathetic, pitying glances, stinging more than any legal threat. She spent the rest of the day in her darkened office, nursing her wounded pride. Her strategy had failed. Her authority was in tatters. She was at her lowest point, a queen in exile in her own home. Late in the afternoon, her doorbell rang. She ignored it. It rang again, more insistently. With a weary sigh, she went to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Stephen Liu. Reluctantly, she opened it. He wasn't there to gloat. He looked tired but focused. I saw what happened this morning, he said, stepping inside. From my place down the street? Then you saw me get humiliated, Carol said flatly. I saw your strategy fail, he corrected, his tone pragmatic, not accusatory. You can't beat him in the court of public opinion, Carol. Not by playing his game. He has framed the debate. He is the future. We are the past. He is collaboration. We are obstruction. As long as we are fighting his vision, we will lose. Carol sank onto one of her perfectly upholstered dining chairs. So what do you suggest, Stephen? That we surrender. Let him build his little utopia on top of our homes. No, Stephen said, pulling out the opposite chair and sitting down, creating a council of two. We stop fighting his vision, and we start fighting him. We need to change the game. He leaned forward, his voice low. I've been doing some research since the last meeting. Not on zoning law, on Nexus Urban Dynamics, on Alex Riley. They're not as clean as their website makes them look. Carol looked up, a flicker of interest cutting through her despair. 2 years ago, Stephen continued, they revitalized a town called Oakstead, about 100 miles from here. The project looked beautiful on paper, just like his rendering, but it came in 40% over budget, and the city had to raise property taxes on everyone to cover the infrastructure costs Nexus had promised to pay for. A year before that, in a development called Rivers Bend, their community integration plan resulted in the displacement of over 200 residents from a low-income apartment complex they bought and tore down. There are skeletons in his corporate closet, Carol. The picture he's painting for our neighbors has a very... The disembodied voice of Martha O'Connell echoed in Carol's mind long after she had hung up the phone. You have an HOA treasurer, right? Keep a very, very close eye on him. The suggestion was so outlandish, so contrary to everything. She knew that her first instinct was to reject it. Gerald Finch. A traitor? The man was a quivering bowl of jello and a cheap laser. He was a human spreadsheet, a creature of pure, unadulterated anxiety. His defining characteristic was his terror of conflict and red ink. The idea that he possessed the cunning and nerve for corporate espionage was laughable, and yet the seed of suspicion, once planted, began to sprout with alarming speed. Carol replayed the last week in her mind, viewing Gerald's actions not as cowardice, but as a calculated performance. His immediate, hysterical panic over the lawsuit, his desperate desire to surrender, to capitulate before the fight had even begun. Was he trying to save the association money, or was he trying to execute the first stage of a planned demolition? His objections to every defensive measure, couched in the language of fiscal prudence, now sounded like sabotage. Her hand, still trembling slightly, reached for the phone again. She dialed Stephen Liu. "Stephen," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we have a new problem. A big one." She relayed the conversation with the ex-councilwoman from Oakstead, culminating in the chilling warning about the treasurer. There was a long pause on Stephen's end. "That's a hell of an accusation, Carol," he said finally, his lawyerly caution kicking in. "Martha O'Connell might be a bitter ex-politician with an axe to grind. We can't destroy a man's reputation based on a hunch from 100 miles away. We need proof. Irrefutable proof. And how do we get that without showing our hand?" Carol asked, the question a genuine plea for guidance. Her old methods of overt force were useless here. This required a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. "We audit him," Stephen said simply. "We use the lawsuit as cover. I'll draft a motion for the board. We frame it as a standard risk management procedure, a way to protect ourselves by demonstrating impeccable due diligence. We'll say our lawyer recommends it. He can't object, without looking like he has something to hide. And who does the audit?" "I know a woman," Stephen said, a new edge to his voice. "A forensic accountant named Elena Alvarez. Her specialty is finding needles in financial haystacks. They call her the Bulldog. If Gerald has skimmed so much as a paperclip, she'll find it." The plan was elegant in its deception. It was a trap laid with the bait of bureaucracy, a weapon Carol could wield with a newfound subtlety. This was Stephen's world, a world of strategic maneuvers and legal chess. And for the first time, Carol was grateful for his presence on her board. The emergency board meeting was held in Carol's living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Gerald arrived looking particularly frayed, his tie slightly askew, his briefcase clutched to his chest like a life raft. Barb was there looking worriedly from face to face. Sensing a shift in the political currents, Carol, channeling a calm she did not feel, began the meeting. Following the script she and Stephen had rehearsed, she presented the need for the audit. "Stephen and I have consulted with Mr. Abernathy," she began, the lie tasting surprisingly natural, "and given the gravity of the pending litigation, he strongly recommends we engage an independent firm to conduct a full financial audit. This is purely a defensive measure. It provides the association, and each of us, as individual board members, with a shield of liability, proving our fiscal house is in perfect order." Gerald's head shot up. "An audit," he stammered. "Carol, that's completely unnecessary. It will cost thousands of dollars. We're supposed to be raising money for a defense fund, not squandering it on redundant paperwork. My books are immaculate. I can bring up the QuickBooks file right now and show you every single transaction." "I'm with Gerald," Barb chimed. "And it does seem like an awful expense when every penny counts." Stephen cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. "This has nothing to do with the quality of Gerald's work, which we all know is exemplary," he said, his tone smooth and reasonable. "This is about optics. A plaintiff's attorney will try to paint this board as amateurish and negligent. Having a certified independent audit on file from after the lawsuit was filed is a powerful rebuttal. It shows we are diligent, responsible, fiduciaries. From a risk management perspective, it's not just prudent, it's essential." His argument was unassailable. To object further would be to argue against responsibility itself. The motion passed, with Carol and Stephen voting yes, and a flustered Gerald voting no. Barb, caught in the crossfire, abstained. The trap was set. The following weeks were a masterclass in patience and public warfare. Elena Alvarez and her team began their quiet, methodical work, while on the surface, the battle with Alex Riley escalated. He officially submitted his conceptual plan to the city, triggering the start of a 90-day review period and the scheduling of the first public hearing. His charm offensive continued unabated. He organized a community tool library out of his garage, lending out lawnmowers and power washers. He was spotted helping the Gables install a new swing set. He was, to all outward appearances, the perfect neighbor, a living rebuke to Carol's portrayal of him as a monster. Carol and Stephen fought to hold their coalition together. They hired a respected land use consultant with the first withdrawals from the defense fund and began preparing a detailed counterpresentation for the hearing. Carol had to endure strained conversations at the community mailbox, assuring her increasingly skeptical neighbors that they had a plan, that victory was possible. One afternoon, Beatrice Miller found her struggling with a stubborn weed near her driveway. "You look tired, Carol," Beatrice observed, not unkindly. "It's hard fighting a war when you're not sure who's on your side, isn't it?" The words hit a little too close to home. The call came 2 weeks later. It was Ms. Alvarez. "I need to see you and Mr. Liu," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "In person, as soon as possible." They met in the sterile conference room of Alvarez's downtown office. She was a petite woman with sharp eyes and an air of intense, unblinking competence. She got straight to the point. On the surface, "Your books are very clean," she began, and Carol felt her hopes plummet. "Receipts are filed, accounts are balanced. Mr. Finch is a tidy bookkeeper." Stephen remained silent, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "However," Alvarez continued, sliding a thin folder across the polished table, "he is sloppy in one area: vendor payments, specifically, payments that fall just under the $2,000 threshold that requires full board approval." She opened the folder. Inside was a spreadsheet. "Over the past 6 months, Mr. Finch has made 5 payments, each for $1,950, to a consulting firm called Finch and Associates. The invoices are for financial planning and advisory services." Carol and Stephen looked at each other. They had never heard of this firm. "Finch and Associates is a registered sole proprietorship," Ms. Alvarez said, delivering the next line like a coroner announcing a cause of death. "The proprietor is listed as Gloria Finch, Gerald's wife." The breath caught in Carol's throat. He had been paying his own wife with HOA funds for the very services he was supposed to be providing as treasurer. It was blatant embezzlement. The amounts weren't huge, less than $10,000, but it was a clear, prosecutable crime. This was the leverage they needed. But Ms. Alvarez wasn't finished. "That's the hook. This is the line." She turned the page to a series of bank statements. "I tracked the money flow from Mrs. Finch's business account. Most of it was spent on credit card bills, a cruise. But 3 weeks ago, she made a single wire transfer for $25,000 to a registered holding company called Northlight Capital Partners." Carol's stomach twisted into a knot. "And Northlight Capital Partners," Ms. Alvarez concluded, tapping a final document, a corporate registration form, "is a wholly owned subsidiary of Nexus Urban Dynamics." The room fell silent. The entire conspiracy laid bare in a handful of documents. Alex Riley hadn't just stumbled upon a weak link, he had forged one. The $25,000 wasn't just a random payment. It was a signing bonus. Gerald Finch, their treasurer, their colleague, wasn't just a petty embezzler. He was a paid informant, a saboteur. His constant panicked objections to spending money on defense weren't about saving the HOA money. They were about earning his own. The drive back to Willow Creek was silent. In Carol's office, Stephen laid the report on her desk. It felt like a bomb sitting between them. Carol's initial reaction wasn't triumph. It was a cold, visceral sickness. The betrayal was so profound, so personal. Gerald had sat in her living room, drunk her iced tea, and looked her in the eye, while actively working to destroy everything she held dear. "So, what now?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Stephen, ever the lawyer, laid out their options. "We take this to the district attorney. It's embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. They'll have a field day. We can confront Gerald, force him to resign in disgrace. We can leak this to the press, ruin Alex Riley's public image before the hearing." The first public hearing was tomorrow night, the official start of the municipal war. Alex would be there, flanked by his team of experts. Gerald would be there, sitting with the HOA board, the serpent hiding in plain sight. A new feeling began to displace the sick. The evening of the public hearing, Carol Ann Peterson surveyed her reflection in the hall mirror. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized. The rigid posture was still there, but the frantic, anxious energy that had fueled her for years was gone, replaced by a stillness so profound it felt like the calm at the eye of a hurricane. She adjusted the shoulders of her navy blue blazer. It no longer felt like armor against a chaotic world. It felt like a uniform, knowingly and deliberately chosen for the task ahead. Her phone buzzed. It was Stephen. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice tight with a lawyer's pregame nerves. "I am," Carol said, her own voice unnervingly serene. "You're sure you want to do it this way? It's a higher risk, higher reward play, Carol, if it backfires." "It won't backfire," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "He built his entire strategy on the belief that we are predictable. Tonight, we will be anything but." The City Hall Council chambers were packed, a perfect amphitheater for the drama about to unfold. On one side of the aisle sat the residents of Willow Creek, their faces a gallery of anxiety and hope. On the other, exuding an aura of expensive, unassailable confidence, was Alex Riley and his team of lawyers and architects from Nexus Urban Dynamics. Carol, Stephen, and Barb took their designated seats at the front. Gerald Finch was already there, dabbing at his sweaty brow with a crumpled handkerchief. He offered Carol a weak, watery smile. "Big night, eh, Carol?" She met his gaze and gave him a slow, serene smile of her own. It was a look of profound, intimate knowledge, and it caused a flicker of confused panic in Gerald's eyes. He quickly looked away. Across the room, Alex Riley caught her eye. He gave her that same subtle, confident nod, the nod of a chess master who sees the board 10 moves ahead and has already declared victory. Carol didn't break his gaze. She simply held it, her expression a perfect, placid blank, letting him wonder what, if anything, lay behind it. The hearing began. and Alex's team was first. Their presentation was a symphony of corporate persuasion. The renderings glowed on the large screens, showcasing a sun-drenched, pedestrian-friendly paradise. Their experts deployed a barrage of data-filled charts, demonstrating negligible traffic impact and positive environmental effects. Alex himself delivered the closing remarks, his voice a rich baritone of reason and inspiration. He spoke of progress, of inclusivity, of building a community for the future. He was so convincing that even Carol could feel a wave of despair wash over the Willow Creek residents behind her. They looked beaten. Then, it was their turn. The chairperson called the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Stephen Liu went first, and he was magnificent. Armed with the counter-report from their own land use consultant, he calmly and systematically dismantled the Nexus presentation. He spoke not with passion, but with lethal precision. He questioned their traffic data assumptions, highlighted the strain on school capacity, and pointed out the long-term infrastructure costs the city would have to bear. He was a skilled legal surgeon, and with every point he made, he clawed back a measure of hope. Finally, the chairperson announced, "The chair now recognizes the HOA president, Ms. Carol Peterson." A hush fell over the room. As Carol walked to the podium, she placed a single, thin manila folder on the lectern and looked out. First at the 5 members of the planning commission, then at the packed audience. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the chamber without a microphone. "You have heard a very compelling story tonight, a story of a beautiful, revitalized future. I am not here to argue with that story. I am here to talk about its price." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "For the past several weeks, my community has been fighting a zoning application, but we have discovered that this was never just about zoning. It has always been about a business model, a model that Nexus Urban Dynamics has perfected in other towns, like Oakstead and Rivers Bend." She began to tell the stories they had uncovered, the tales of budget overruns, broken promises, and displaced families. Alex's lawyers began to stir, whispering to each other. "Mr. Riley is a brilliant strategist," Carol continued, her tone shifting from narrative to analytical. "He knows that to push through a controversial project, you can't just sell a vision, you must also neutralize the opposition. You must weaken their resolve, undermine their leadership, you must rot them from the inside out." Now, she moved, slowly, deliberately. She turned her head and fixed her gaze directly on Gerald Finch. The entire room followed her line of sight. 100 pairs of eyes landed on the sweating, terrified treasurer. Gerald froze, his mouth slightly agape. A man, impaled by a searchlight in the town of Oakstead. Carol's voice rang through the sudden, tomb-like silence. The deciding vote on the city council was cast by a trusted official on the finance committee, an official who, it was later discovered, had received a substantial, undocumented payment from a holding company connected to Nexus. A coincidence, I'm sure. It seems to be part of the playbook. When you cannot win on the merits, you can always attempt to purchase a vote, or, in the case of Willow Creek Estates, you can purchase a treasurer. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Barb Jenkins stared at Gerald, her hand flying to her mouth. Alex Riley's composure finally cracked. A flash of pure, murderous rage crossed his face before he wrestled it back into a mask of theatrical outrage. "I have in this folder," Carol said, her voice dropping to a low, damning tone as she tapped the manila folder, "a certified forensic audit of our association's finances. It details a pattern of embezzlement by our treasurer, Mr. Gerald Finch, who has been funneling HOA funds into a shell company owned by his wife." She opened the folder, and it also contains these. She held up a document for the commission to see. These are bank statements, showing a payment of $25,000 from that shell company to Northlight Capital Partners, a holding company, wholly owned by Nexus Urban Dynamics. She looked past the stunned commissioners, past the frantic reporters, and directly at Alex Riley. "This," she declared, her voice resonating with absolute finality, "is not a zoning debate. This is evidence of a criminal conspiracy." The world exploded. The chamber erupted into pure pandemonium. The chairperson was banging his gavel, his calls for order lost in the din. Reporters were scrambling over chairs, their phones held high. Gerald Finch made a wet, guttural sound and slumped forward in his chair, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. Alex's lawyers were on their feet, shouting objections, but they were drowning in the tidal wave Carol had unleashed. She had not just fought his battle, she had torched his entire kingdom. The hearing was suspended. Paramedics rushed in, attending to the unconscious Gerald. City officials huddled with the city attorney, their faces pale with shock and fury. Carol turned from the podium, her mission accomplished. Stephen met her at the foot of the stage, his face a mask of awe. "My God, Carol," he whispered, I have no words." As they moved toward the exit, a figure blocked their path. It was Alex Riley. The charming facade was gone, burned away to reveal something ugly and raw. His eyes were blazing with a cold, venomous hatred. "You," he hissed, his voice a low snarl meant only for her. "You have no idea what you've just done. This is not over." Carol looked at the man she had so thoroughly vanquished. She felt no fear, no triumph, only a vast, bone-deep weariness. "I think it is, Mr. Riley," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The difference is, I know it, and you don't. Not yet." She walked past him, Stephen at her side, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of his ambitions. A week later, a fragile peace had settled over Willow Creek. The rezoning application was indefinitely postponed pending a municipal ethics investigation. The district attorney's office had convened a grand jury, and both Gerald Finch, now out on bail, and Nexus Urban Dynamics were named as targets of a sweeping corruption probe. The mountain of furniture on Alex's lawn was gone, leaving only yellowed, dying patches on the grass. The house itself stood dark and empty. Carol was in her garden, pruning a rose bush with practiced hands, when Beatrice Miller leaned over the dividing fence. "Well," Beatrice said, and for the first time, her smile was completely devoid of irony. It was a look of genuine respect. "I have to hand it to you, Carol. You saved the neighborhood." Carol snipped a withered bloom and looked at her neighbor. "We all did, Beatrice," she said, and for the first time, the word we felt real and inclusive. We just needed to remember how. The story felt complete. The villain was vanquished, the traitor exposed. The suburban dream, for now, was safe. Evening. Carol was in her office, tidying the remnants of their war. She picked up the file on Nexus, intending to put it away for good. As she did, a piece of paper fluttered out from the back. It was the corporate registration for North Capital Partners, the holding company that had paid Gerald. She scanned the list of board members, a list she had only glanced at before. Alex Riley, CEO, a few other names she didn't recognize, and then one she did. It was listed as a minority partner, a silent investor. The name was Arthur Vance. The name tickled her memory. It wasn't someone from Willow Creek, it was a name connected to the city. With a rising sense of unease, she typed the name into her computer.